Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. Now, tell yourself where you are. Chances are, the answer came quickly and without hesitation. You're right here, somewhere behind your eyes, inside your head, watching the world through your brain. That feeling is so natural, it seems impossible to question. But what if it's an illusion? What if you have never actually been inside your head? Not for a single second of your life. What if your identity is something far greater than the skull you call home? This isn't a rhetorical question. There are philosophical, neurological, and spiritual arguments that point exactly to this. And if they're right, then everything you believe about who you are needs to be reconsidered. Today, we're going to walk through 4 ideas that fit together like pieces of a puzzle. By the end, you won't just have an answer, you'll have a different question. And that question will change the way you exist. Think of a moment when you were so completely absorbed in something that you forgot yourself entirely. Maybe it was music, a sunset, a deep conversation with someone you love. In those moments, you weren't inside your head. You were somewhere larger. And strangely, in those moments, you felt more alive, more real, more whole than at any other point in your day. That feeling is not accidental. It's possible that in those moments, you touched something true about your own nature, something that everyday life makes us forget over and over again. There's a phenomenon called the first-person perspective, and it completely dominates our sense of existence. For as long as we can remember, we feel as though there's a self located somewhere inside the body, usually around the head, looking outward, as if the brain were a control room and the world were a screen right in front of us. But if you look closely, you'll notice that this location has never actually been verified. No one has ever found the exact point inside the brain where this observer lives. Neuroscientists have mapped regions responsible for memory, language, emotion, and yet the central self remains elusive, always one step ahead of the instruments trying to find it. Philosophy has a technical name for this puzzle, the hard problem of consciousness. Why does subjective experience exist at all? Why is there something it feels like to be you, rather than just neutral information processing? No materialist theory has answered this set of neuroscientist Antonio Damasio spent decades studying how the brain constructs the sense of self. And even he acknowledges that the feeling of being you is a construction, a narrative the brain assembles, not a fixed reality. This doesn't mean you don't exist. It means you exist in a way the brain cannot fully contain. And that's just the beginning. Consider this: everything you experience of the world arrives to you already filtered. Light enters through your eyes and is converted into electrical signals. Sound enters through your ears and becomes nerve impulses. You have never had direct contact with the reality out there. Everything, as the world is an internal reconstruction. But then who exactly is doing the reconstructing? And where is that someone? When you flip the question upside down, you start to see that the feeling of being inside your head might itself be a projection. It may not be that consciousness is inside the brain. It may be that the brain is inside consciousness. There is an ancient practice in the contemplative traditions of the East that invites the practitioner to ask a simple and devastating question. Who is thinking? Not the content of the thought, but the subject who thinks. When you try to locate this observer, something curious happens. You find more thoughts, more images, more sensations, but you never find the observer itself. It's like trying to see your own eye without a mirror. The seeker cannot find itself because it is the very instrument of the search. This led philosophers like David Hume to conclude that the self may not be a thing at all, but a process, a flowing stream of experiences with no fixed center. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, there's a distinction between the ego and the self. The ego is the identity we know, the character who believes it lives inside the head. The self is something vastly larger, a wholeness that includes dimensions the ego cannot access directly. Jung wasn't speaking in metaphor. He was describing a psychic reality that his patients encountered repeatedly in dreams, visions, and altered states. And what they found invariably pointed to something beyond the borders of the skull. But there's something even deeper that almost no one considers. If the observer cannot be found inside the brain, then a radical possibility emerges. Perhaps the observer is not local. Perhaps the consciousness you call you has no physical address. Researchers like Bernardo Kestra propose that consciousness is fundamental to reality, and that the brain acts as a filter or a reducer. not a generator. Just as a radio doesn't create the radio signal but tunes into it, the brain may not create consciousness, but simply channel a small portion of it into this body, this moment, this character. You wouldn't be inside the brain. You would be beyond it, looking through it. Quantum physics introduced an idea that is both unsettling and liberating. At the subatomic level, reality is not made of solid, localized things, but of probabilities fields that only collapse into definite states when they are observed. What is an observer? That question has divided physicists for decades. Some, like the mathematician John von Neumann, argued seriously that consciousness is what collapses the wave function. This means consciousness would not be a passive byproduct of matter, but something that actively participates in the structure of reality. It wouldn't be inside the universe as a passenger. It would be woven into the very fabric of what exists. Researcher Greg Braden, exploring ancient sacred texts from various traditions, finds the same idea expressed again and again in different forms. There is a field that connects all of creation, and human consciousness has the ability to interact with that field directly. While Braden works at the frontier between science and spirituality, this idea of a consciousness field resonates with emerging concepts in biology, like Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields, which suggest that organisms are shaped by fields of information that transcend the physical genome. The core idea is always the same. There are organizing patterns that exist beyond matter, yet matter obeys them. And now comes the part that almost no one stops to consider. If consciousness is a field and not a localized thing, then what you experience as your stream of consciousness may be more like a wave in the ocean than an isolated object. The wave has a distinct shape, a direction, a speed, but it doesn't exist apart from the ocean. It is the ocean temporarily expressing itself in a particular form. You are an individuation of something vast that no language has yet found an adequate name for. The feeling of being confined inside your head would then be like the wave believing that the ocean is inside it, a complete inversion of perspective. And the most remarkable thing is that you have already felt this ocean. In those moments of total absorption we mentioned earlier, you already know what it feels like. There are accounts of near-death experiences that challenge any purely cerebral explanation. People who, with their brains clinically inactive, describe vivid, coherent, and verifiable experiences, including perceptions of events that took place in distant locations while they were unconscious. Dotto Piem van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, conducted one of the most rigorous studies on this subject and concluded that consciousness appears to function independently of the physical brain in certain states. He is not making a mystical claim. He is reporting clinical data that conventional neuroscience has yet to adequately explain. But perhaps the most accessible evidence isn't found in extreme cases. Perhaps it's found in you right now. Pay attention to your experience in this exact moment. There are thoughts, the sound of words, images arising, but who notices all of that? There is a silent awareness that observes the very flow of experience without being disturbed by it. Contemplatives call this space pure consciousness, the witness, the presence. It has no form, no location, no identifiable beginning, and when you touch it, even for just an instant, the sense of being locked inside your head simply dissolves. Because that space has no walls. To exist beyond the brain doesn't mean abandoning the body or denying physical experience. It means recognizing that the body and brain are instruments of expression for something that precedes and transcends them. You use the body to move through space, the way a musician uses a violin to express music. The violin is not the musician. The body is not you. And when the violin is set aside at the end of the concert, the music doesn't disappear. It returns to the vastness from which it came, ready to resonate through another instrument, in another time, in another form. This idea, which may sound poetic, might be the most precise description available of the structure of existence. If you have never been inside your head, then what changes in your life now? Most of the fears we carry are tied to the threat of loss of health security, the people we love, and ultimately, life itself. But if you are greater than the body, if consciousness is not produced by the brain but only expressed through it, then what exactly can be lost? This doesn't eliminate pain, but it removes from pain the quality of final extinction. How much of what you call yourself is built from comparison, from narrative, from stories others told about you that you repeated until you believed them. If the self is a construction of the brain, then it can be reconstructed. You are not trapped in the version of yourself that circumstances have shaped. That is one of the most liberating realizations available to a human being. And if consciousness exists beyond the brain, then the death of the brain is not necessarily the end of consciousness. This is not a promise of personal immortality in the conventional religious sense. It is the possibility that the pattern of consciousness you are dissolves back into the larger field from which it emerged, like a wave returning to the ocean. Not annihilation, dissolution, return. We cling to things because we believe they complete us, that without them, the self would be incomplete. But if you are already the entire field expressing itself through a single point, then nothing outside you can complete what is already whole. This doesn't mean indifference. It means love without desperation, presence without possession. And if you exist beyond the body, then the question, why am I here, takes on an entirely different depth. It's no longer about finding a social role or an economic function. It's about discovering how this particular expression of consciousness wants to manifest in this time, in this body, in this encounter with existence. And this journey doesn't end here, because if you have never been inside your head, where are you? If the observer cannot be found as an object, what is the observer? If consciousness is a field and not a location, then what separates you from the rest of existence? Perhaps the answer is not an idea you can store in memory. Perhaps it's an experience that must be lived repeatedly with growing attention. Perhaps the spiritual work is not to learn more, but to unlearn the illusions that are blocking what you already are. And if that's true, then the next question we need to explore together may be the most radical of all. What happens to this consciousness when the body it inhabits is finally set aside? That is what we'll investigate in the next video. Death is not the opposite of life. And what that reveals about the nature of what you are will, in all likelihood, surprise you.